It's easy to get shiny channel syndrome. We've all had it, and whether it's us or a founder or a fellow team member who says, have you heard of this? Or should we try this? It's very easy to just jump on that next trend. But do you actually need a new channel? Is it actually going to deliver you results? We're going to use a new framework that I've created especially just for CXL called the LEAP framework. Here we're going to think about all these things before we jump in to test a new channel, and when we're testing it, making sure that it was worth that leap. In this content feed, I am going to tell you to not try to test too many channels and give you a really helpful framework to make sure that you don't just overdo it, keep testing new channels, and help you really think critically, do you actually need a new channel? So the first is long versus short-term balance. What I mean with this is that it's very easy to get caught up in wanting a new channel without thinking about, is this a long-term channel or is this a short-term channel? So when I'm talking about short-term channels, I'm talking about things like TikTok ads, Snapchat ads, Meta ads. They're all short-term boosts. And when we only focus on them and keep adding short-term channels, we might feel like it works because we see a little boost as the channel worked out, but then we see a drop. The alternative long-term channels, so things like social media, they're more long-term, SEO, it takes time to build up, partnerships. When we do only those, then we don't see much growth for a long while, and then it only happens much later, which is also not sustainable. So we need to think, is this a long or short term, and how's the balance with the two? Because we want to have both so that we have that boost and we have that growth, but we're also building for the future and we're not just chasing these little highs. As a smaller startup, your balance is going to be different. You are going to probably be doing a bit more of the short-term channels because you need to prove, maybe to investors, maybe proof of concept, that it works. And you're also still working out a lot of things. You're messaging your audience with the right kind of product or service setup. So you're working out all these things. So investing too much in the long term before you've worked those things out doesn't make sense. You're also going to be testing a bit more at the same time versus a bigger company where they'll probably be testing a few less things at the same time because they've got a bigger stable base to be building on. In a corporate, you have the luxury of being able to focus more on the longer term and building that around it. So your mix will probably be a lot more longer term than in a startup. So before you add a channel, this is the first thing. Before you take that leap, think about the long versus short-term balance and see how is your balance right now and where are you actually struggling? Are you chasing short-term highs, or are you only building and not seeing the shorter-term results and learning those key things to build a strong longer-term organization? Then evaluate potential channels. To do this, there are 5 things that I like to look at. We won't be able to cover this in depth within this video, but this is actually all covered in my growth strategy course, and we go through each step by step. So the first is understanding your target audience. Where are they at? Where do they spend time? What is really their job to be done? And where are they looking and thinking about that? You want to be conducting user research to work that out with that audience, and also researching similar brands. And I don't mean just direct competitors, but other brands that are helping with that job to be done or speaking to that target audience. And also, what are the newest channels? Because it's worth considering them. They're going to have a lower cost, higher risk than existing channels, but it's worth considering them in your mix before you prioritize them. You also want to be analyzing the data from your existing channels if you have them to see what's been working and what's not been working. And you also want to make sure that you're considering both linear channels, so more like funnel channels that everything you put in gets sudden output, versus growth loops and seeing like what's the mix that I have of that and do I have a good mix of that. You don't want to be prioritizing them. This again walk through a way more depth in the growth strategy course, but here I'll just quickly walk through the 4 different factors that you prioritize based on, or that at least I prioritize based on, and feel free to adjust this framework based on what's important to your organization, because your organization might, for example, be very limited in resources, and then you might place a lot heavier weight on the fit with resources than another brand. The first column is about, is it a good fit based on your research of your customer audience? Are they on there? Is it relevant? The second is ability to compete. So that's where you're filling in like how difficult is this channel to compete on? Existing bigger channels, yes, they are lower risk, but they're harder to compete on. It's getting harder and harder to be successful on channels like Meta and TikTok because of the resources and momentum it requires on the creative side. Potential reach, how big an audience can you reach? It's amazing to have a great niche new channel, but if it's very small, not a lot of people using it yet, it's not going to have a big reach. It might not be worth your time. And does it fit your resources? So in terms of like the budgets you have available, in terms of the people you have available and the skills, it's not to say you can't hire people on, but that's again, the resources. Do you have the budget to hire people on? Because if you don't, then that might not be the right fit for you right now. Then we move on today. Assess a potential channel. Here you want to work out the potential cost of acquisition as best as you can to evaluate, would this even work? Now this is very like back of the napkin maths. And again, in the course, I give a whole example of what this looks like and work it out for a B2B brand, evaluating Google ads. But here, let's just imagine you're trying to understand what is the actual cost of it. What is it based on past data if you have it, or data of competitors or benchmarks out there? What could you expect? And again, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you a far better idea. I've had brands test channels that if they'd just taken an hour or so to do these calculations, they would have realized up front it wasn't worth their effort. Either the volume wasn't there or the costs were too high. And as a result, they shouldn't have tested it. You ideally want to make sure you also include all the other costs, because that's the other challenge, is we look purely at the costs of what we're spending. You know, Google ads might appear more expensive than Instagram. Those two shouldn't be compared either way because it's a long-term versus short-term channel. But what we're not considering with something like social is the amount of hours. Let's take affiliates otherwise. Like that's a more conversion driving channel, slightly awareness too. But there it's like a lot of time and effort. And that time is also money. You can just use like an example of like, okay, this is what an hour is worth when doing those calculations to keep them simple. Now we're ready for the P of the leap, performance checks. So this is when you set up this idea, you are going to test this channel, it's gone through the first 3 steps. You still need to have a really clear structure for it. You want to really limit the number of new channels you're testing at a time. So you need to have a clear stop date. When are you going to stop testing that channel? When is that test done? And for this, I like to work out these 5 factors. I like to think about what is my overall goal? What am I trying to achieve with this test? When is it a success? And that's that measure of success factor. When is it exactly a success? Is it a certain number of conversions at a certain cost of acquisition? How long will that take? That's the duration part of it. How long until I can measure that? And you might even have in between benchmarks of like, okay, well, after month 2, we expect this. After month 3, we expect this. And we're going to test for up to 6 months. Too often we start testing lots of different channels and we just keep testing it endlessly and then it becomes a mess. We want to be limiting the number of channels we're testing. So by having a clear testing plan, again, it isn't complex. It can be done in like an hour at most to get this worked out. But it helps you be really, really clear and strategic about how you're going to test it. You also want to include in there the budget and the resources. And I like to include ideas of how we like to test it. Because the truth is, when you test a new channel, you're not going to succeed immediately. Most don't. If you do, amazing. But most do not. Like when I was testing TikTok ads for a brand, we were running some tests. We were having some issues at first with the fact that they were putting us in a wrong category and blocking the ads. Then we got that solved. We saw certain ads were working really well, others weren't. So we kept iterating and improving based on those learnings. And we also had a whole backlog of ideas of types of different TikToks we wanted to be testing, types of formats we wanted to be testing. And because we had that whole backlog, we didn't get deterred by 1 or 2 wrong tests. One test on a channel doesn't mean it doesn't work for you. It means you've run one test, you've learned one thing. So have that backlog. It's less important than the rest, but it will help keep you motivated as you test it. So that's how you do it. That's how before you leap and test a new channel, you can really limit the number of channels you test and the way you're using your resources and being more effective by using the LEAP framework. I hope you test it out the next time you're considering testing a new channel.